Can everyone hear me? First of all, thank you for attending this panel session on hosting major sports events. My name is Matt Cutler. I'm the editor of Sport Business International magazine. If you want a copy of it, come and grab me later. But before we kick off events, I'd like to invite Mark to the stage. He is from Eurosport, the sponsors of this panel session.
Thanks, Matt, and welcome to this afternoon's first of two sessions that will be highlighting the developments and opportunities within the sector of sports tourism. This is the third consecutive year that Eurosport has supported this segment within the WTM schedule, and from a company perspective, it's an area in a sector that continues to grow and develop, both in terms of working with tourism boards, promoting destinations, and also from an investment aspect. One of the main reasons why we focus in this area is because we truly believe that the passion points of sport and tourism connect so well with each other and give us a great opportunity to really drive the awareness of destinations, shift the perception, have an uplift socially as well, and importantly, economically. The sports tourism sector is one of the fastest growing niche sections within the travel and tourism. It has an estimated annual value currently of $600 billion that equates to about 10% of the GDP of the total travel and tourism sector. So a massive market out there. According to the United Nations, the WTO, the sports can either be a permanent demand driver for a destination, or it can be seen as an occasional one, such as an Olympic Games. I like to see it in four clearer aspects. One is participation sports tourism, areas such as team tours or city marathons. Spectator sports tourisms, which embraces the elements of mega events, signature events, and mass participation events. Thirdly, luxury sports from golf and ski holidays. And fourthly, nostalgia sports tourism, for example, visiting the Nou Camp in Barcelona. These four areas can provide multiple direct and indirect benefits, both domestically and internationally, for international tourism perspectives and destinations. In terms of hosting mega events, we can only look back into what happened last year here in London in 2012 with one of the biggest Olympic Games. The exposure that London gained, for example, with the opening ceremony alone, was around 900 million viewers tapped in to watch the opening ceremony. So a massive awareness level being built there. Visit Britain have currently estimated that with the hosting of the Olympic Games, they're expecting additional 4.4 million visitors coming to London in the UK from 2011 to 2015, bringing an investment level of £2.3 billion into the local economy. Next up in the mega events, we only have to look at Brazil and Rio with the World Cup next year and then the Olympics in 2016. This is a huge opportunity for this destination to showcase itself globally, to drive the economic and social uplifting within the region. It's estimated that between now and the Olympics starting in 2016, there'll be an uplift of 63% in visitors going to Brazil prior to the Rio Games. It's not just about the mega events, though. The luxury sports area is one that cannot be undervalued. In terms of the yield that you can gain from that, it can be highly profitable. Look into the golfing tourism sector, for example. It's noticed that up to 4 times more can be gained from a golfing visitor than the average visitor to a destination. So tapping into a passion point of an individual can be highly profitable. I think looking into the signature events, which are the ones that happen annually, there's no better example than in Singapore with the F1 Grand Prix. It's a perfect example of where a government has collaborated with the organizer to develop and build a phenomenal event to showcase a city and, importantly, to drive tourism to that destination. There was a big investment in the infrastructure in the Marina Bay region of Singapore. They also built a VIP exclusive airport as well, and the government backed this event with $66 million every year to support and develop this event. Singapore also raises an interesting area that we all need to be aware of now when we start to build a sports tourism strategy, and that's cultural understanding and awareness. In Europe, for example, the sports fan is all about what happens in that stadium. That's, 90 minutes of football, or what happens in track and field. It's about the winning and the losing experience. In Asia, for example, where I'm based, it's not necessarily about that. It's about exhibition and entertainment. And the Singapore F1 Grand Prix, going back to that, is a great example of where they've catered for that F1 fan, domestically and globally, but they've also built around that to pull in an incremental fan base as well. They developed the music and entertainment zone, culture attractions, and mass food and beverage. The success and understanding and acknowledgement of that means that there's been incremental growth year on year, they stay longer, and the individuals spend more as well. I think what's also important now is that noticing in the area of sports tourism, the model's beginning to change as well. Predominantly, it was always governments and federations and national sports boards investing to pull events into the destination. What we're seeing now in recent trends is actually sports teams and sports brands investing abroad to build their global brand and find new revenue streams as well. There's no other better example than Real Madrid, one of the biggest and famous and largest fan-based teams in the world, who are now building the first sportainment plaza in the Middle East with the aim to bring in 1 million visitors once it's built in 2015. So how do we win at sports tourism? I think it's key that the element of collaboration, collective approach, very clear objectives are clearly set out amongst all stakeholders within the value chain and the tourism value chain as well. The governments and federations must be committed to the cause, invest importantly within that in terms of the infrastructure and the relationships with the tourism suppliers, but also work importantly with the international media as well, and that's pre, during, and post those events. From a Eurosport perspective, we invest heavily within these events. We work exceptionally closely with the national tourism boards, the national sports associations, because we believe it's not about that moment of providing an engaging platform for, say, the 54 million fans of the Tour de France, but it's actually developing a story for the tourism board and the destination to showcase what they can offer to that fan to encourage them to come to the destination. We do believe that the sports tourism sector is one that currently is slightly undervalued, but we do believe that the return on investment can be very high, hence we're here supporting this event. So I'd like to hand back to Matt and over to the panel to take this over in more detail.
Thanks, Mark. I think, just following on from what Mark introduced us with there, I think it's quite apt that here we are in the east of London, one of probably the area of the UK that's undergone the biggest regeneration in recent memory, obviously for the London 2012 Olympic Games that happened last year. The Olympic site, which is just down the road, is now transformed into the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park, which is a visitor venue destination, offering venues and attractions alongside new homes, schools and businesses. And this is just one of the many legacy projects undertaken in this city to ensure the huge influx of visitors that happened last year continues in the long term. So from major top-tier events like the Olympic Games to international sailing regattas, mass participation races, what exactly is it that makes hosting major international sports events the perfect way of driving the tourism economy of a city or a region? And what is it that sport can offer that other entertainment options can't? There'll be some of the many questions we'll answer. Firstly, I'll introduce you to the panel. To my furthest right, to your furthest left, we have Donna Taylor. Donna's the co-founder of major events consultancy Evolution 12, and she was the head of accommodation at London 2012. She has over 25 years of experience in the hospitality industry, and was previously managing director of High Life Breaks, a short breaks tour operator owned by Thistle Hotels. She's currently living in Baku, where she's the director of villages and game services for the European Games in 2015. To Donna's left, we have Ian Edmondson, who's the head of major events at London & Partners. London & Partners is the official promotional organisation for the city we're in at the moment. Ian has over 20 years business experience across public and private sector organisations and is responsible for the long-term event opportunities for London. He's also the brains behind Prudential Ride London, the cycling event that happened for the first time last year, and was part of the bid team that secured the 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games for London. Then we have Sally Edwards, who's the director of the Dubai Calendar. The Dubai Calendar team is responsible for developing and implementing annual events for the Emirate, and Sally works directly with rights owners to host and promote events. Sally previously worked as the General Manager of Operations and Communications at Events New South Wales, where she was in charge of attracting and nurturing events for Sydney. And last but not least, we have Paul Dunphy, who's based in New Zealand and is the founder and director of Winning Major Events Consultancy, which specialises in both advising cities and rights holders in hosting and awarding major international events. Paul has around 15 years experience in the sector, and he's travelled extensively around the world, attracting major events to New Zealand, where he was previously manager of event prospecting and bidding at Auckland Tourism Events and Economic Development. So to kick off, Ian, I'll come to you if I may. Obviously the Olympics and the Paralympic Games, two of the biggest sporting events the city can hope to host. Can you describe exactly what the legacy of the event has been in driving the tourism industry for London?
Well, it'd probably take up too much time if I tried to describe the full effects the Olympic and Paralympic Games have had. But I think one thing to put out on the table to begin with is that London is already a tourism destination and has been a tourism destination for years before the Games. So that isn't necessarily the primary reason for hosting the Olympic Games. But nonetheless, it's had an impact. It's had a positive impact from the pure tourism numbers. The first 6 months of this year, tourism is up on previous years, and traditionally many host cities of the Olympic and Paralympic Games have had a dip in and around the Games. It's also provided a platform in the area of regeneration of the Olympic Park you mentioned for a different type of tourism. So we're here to talk about sports tourism, and what's left in the Olympic Park are venues that enhance London's offer for sport than we had before. So, that's in place. Some of them have only just opened, some of them continue to open in the coming few months. So it's early days to say the actual impact that has, but we do know there are a calendar of major events already in place that we've secured for each of the venues, whether it's the World Athletics Championships and the Paralympic Athletics Championships in 2017, or the European Swimming Championships and Masters Swimming Championships in 2016, or 2016 Track Cycling World Championships in the velodrome. So they're the sort of one-off calendar of events, but there are other tenancy agreements and events in place for each of those venues in the intervening time as well. So that purely from the regeneration and sort of the venues related to some of the games venues, it's looking very positive for that. But I think from a wider perspective, the city, by staging the Donna and the team at Lowcog staging such an incredible games, has done a much bigger impact on the sort of the rest of the world than perhaps you can do in simply measuring the numbers of tourists in the following 6 months or a few months of since the Games, and that is about painting a picture of London which is different to perhaps what people expected or saw of London before. We're we have 26 million plus tourists here a year. Many of them know London for its relatively dry historic buildings, and less so for its creative cultural content, sporting content, dynamic, welcome, enthusiasm, some of these things that perhaps are slightly changing people's perception. And in a world that is changing and in a marketplace that is getting younger, that's important, and it's important for London, it's important for the UK in the next 10 years as the travel industry changes.
And amazingly, people still come to London when the rain is happening like it is at the moment. Sally, Ian mentioned that before the Olympic Games, London was already a tourism destination. How does that contrast at all with Dubai? Obviously, Dubai has a calendar of events, not all sport, may I add. What's the strategy for Dubai hosting events and driving tourism?
I think just to start with, London very much is a city that's very established. Dubai as a city, probably it's only really in the last sort of 40 to 50 years that we've started to appear on the sort of global stage, and particularly so more and more now. We are very focused on tourism and events in the tourism. So we have a Tourism 2020 strategy where the aim is to double tourism and triple the visitor economy by 2020, and events are a key pillar of that strategy. So our team is Dubai Calendar. We are there to look at creating and promoting an attractive annual calendar of events for the city. We sit within the tourism body, so we are a division within the tourism organisation in Dubai. Sporting events are a very key plank of what we do as far as that calendar is concerned as well. And whilst we don't necessarily have the as I suppose probably more to say as an emerging city in respects, as a city that hosts events, we have had to develop our strategy slightly differently. And interesting, something like the Rugby Sevens, which is now the IRB has taken on as a global tournament. The actual Rugby Sevens competition that exists in Dubai will be on at the end of this month, and it's the 42nd edition of it. So it's actually, we do have a history of developing some of those events as well. So we have whether it's that, we've also had events which we have created within the city purely as a tourism driver. So in early January, we have the 25th year of the Amiga Dubai Desert Classic, of which 17 of the winners over the last 25 years will be coming back to Dubai to participate in that competition. So we don't necessarily have the luxury of long-standing competitions, but so we have created some. That said as well, in doing that as the city, we also look at how we can attract and host events. So part of the role of Dubai at the moment is actually creating or putting ourselves out on that global stage as a city that is more than capable of hosting and putting on great events and sporting events. So this year we've hosted the Junior World Swimming Championships. Currently at the moment, the Under-17 World Cup is taking place, and one of my colleagues was just been in touch with me telling me he was off to the semi-finals of the Under-17 World Cup. So we're coming up on those sorts of events and attracting those as well, but it's been a really important part of our strategy to actually create our own events as well.
And Donna, you're obviously living out in Azerbaijan at the moment, in its capital Baku. If we have a scale, London at the top, already established tourism industry, maybe a little bit further down Dubai, where does Baku rate on that scale?
I would say if London was at the top of the scale, then it would be fair to say that Baku would be fairly close to the bottom right now. But, it's a young country. It's only 22 years old. And I think, we can't forget that. Actually, tourism in Azerbaijan is up 10% year on year. So their aspirations for growth in tourism are huge, and actually hosting the European Games will without doubt be a catalyst for this, as the Eurovision Song Contest was in 2012.
And Paul, obviously London, Olympic Games, Baku with the European Games, two major international sporting events. Is hosting a major event like that the only way for a city to put itself on the map?
No, not at all, Matt. I think people here need to realise that sporting events are an amazing way to actually drive visitation. And you don't have to be thinking about Olympic Games all the time. There are about 450 cities in the world that have a population of greater than about 1.5 million. So competition for hosting major events is very, very high, and it's only going to increase. So no, you don't need to focus on those major events. There are a lot of, there are actually thousands of events out there that are kind of the next tier down below Olympics and stuff like that. And where I've come from, Auckland, we understood that we're never going to win the rights to host Olympic Games or a FIFA World Cup. So we were very clear on what we wanted to target, those events that had right strategic alignment with our city. And so very, very powerful, Matt. There's a lot of smaller major events that destinations should try to secure because they can drive really good visitation. Just one example is a small event, a New Zealand badminton championships. It was only 250 competitors, but open to Asia as well. And over that 2-day period, they spent $30 million on the gambling table at a local casino. So we have now secured the rights to host the Chinese World Masters Badminton Champs with 3,500 competitors, which happens in our down season, in our winter. So events are a really great way, sporting events, to drive numbers.
Yeah. And Ian, if I come back to you, obviously London has a packed calendar of sporting and non-sporting events. For instance, just down the road we've got the ATP World Tour Finals at the O2, an annual event. how does the strategy differ from attracting or putting on perhaps annual sports events to the one-off, the major events like the Olympics, like major events that only come around in 4-year cycles?
Well, before we bid for the Olympic Games, the city really didn't coordinate itself to do that sort of bidding cycle for one-off games. It was just the city, London, has been and still is an incredible platform for people to take their opportunities and create, some really exciting, dynamic, world-class events. And the Wimbledon Championships started at a private members club in southwest London 130, 40 years ago now. London Marathon started 32 years ago and was organised by 2 guys and worked with the rest of the sort of authorities to get permissions to close the roads, etc. So, London, before we were bidding for the Olympic Games, was a platform to create incredible world-class sport and world-class sporting events and some of the great venues, whether it's Wembley Stadium here. So actually, London found a way of creating, tapping into the market without needing to bid for the games. But I don't think nobody does, very few people regret bidding for the Olympic Games because the prizes are bigger and the exposure is different, and it helps you be a catalyst for many different types of change. So the major events that are sort of more one-off and the mega events like the Olympic Games are complete one-offs, are a catalyst for change. And it did so much good, whether it's regeneration of the East End, whether it's helping to improve the quality of our transport system and some of the disability, the accessibility to people that are disabled, just getting taxis and buses that are easier to use for the city, which they are now partly because we staged the Olympic Games. Those are sort of the big prizes that have required a big investment, but we know in surveys this year, after the Games, when all the money has been spent, over 80% of the people thought it was money well spent. So, there are big prizes for these big one-off championships that you bid for, beyond simply the tourism numbers, but some of the other benefits as well. So having recognised that, the city over the past 5 years has been in the market for coordinating itself and bidding for other major championships as well. And we've got the World Cup rugby starting. We'll be here in Rugby Union in 2 years' time. Rugby League is happening now in the country. The Tour de France is coming back through London, believe it or not, next year. So another iconic world-class event. There is a pretty strong calendar over the next 10 years that is a mix of those one-off events and the sort of annual calendar of events as well. And we, recognising that sort of value and capability of the city, you mentioned earlier Ride London, because we're as a city able to create world-class events, we actually became a rights owner, not just a bid of a city to another authority. We created our own event, like the London Marathon, but for cyclists. So over 2 days, we created an event in August this year where not only did 250 elite top cyclists compete on approximately the Olympic road race course, but 16,000 amateurs cycled 100 miles, finished on the same finish line in front of Buckingham Palace, and many of which then travelled from outside, well, in fact 2/3 travelled from outside London, and then 50,000 people on the Saturday, the day before, from 2 to 82 cycled on traffic-free roads in a safe environment in the centre of London, again crossing that line in Buckingham Palace. And that was again made up of more than half the people from outside London. So that's something we created this year. It's a televised event. It's televised on BBC television in the UK. It's televised internationally through our colleagues at Eurosport and other broadcasters. And that's something the city's now put in place and will stay in place for years to come. Subject to the city authorities and allowing it to happen. That is something that will offer value back to the city and be part of that calendar regular events alongside the London Marathon, Wimbledon Championships, Test match cricket and professional football.
Mm-hmm. Donna, Ian spoke there of the power of a major one-off event to be a catalyst for change. You're there in Baku at the coalface. Is that something that you're witnessing firsthand?
Yes, definitely. The development in the city is quite phenomenal, and the kind of regeneration to the city. So, on the face value, when you first drive in, you can see, the ex-Soviet buildings, but even the facades of them are all being changed. They're rebuilding them. They're renovating the stadia, they're building new stadia. And that's because of the European Games coming, but actually with the intention of bidding for the Olympic Games. They did unsuccessfully bid for the 2024 Games, and actually they're not quite ready for it yet, so they do need a bit more time, but they will get there. They're capable of doing it. It isn't just the buildings that are being renovated, the total infrastructure in the city is being looked at, all the road networks, the metro system. It's literally changing the city overnight, and we can see it every single day that we go to work. The main stadium goes up by another metre, quite incredibly, because there are so many people working on it, which also in turn is generating so much work, and people are coming from all over the region to work in Azerbaijan. So they would love to be the Dubai of the Caspian. So who knows, in maybe 50 years' time.
Paul, I know we were talking yesterday about Christchurch, a city that you've been working with. Do you want to talk us through how they're looking to use major sports events as
I'm not sure how many people know of New Zealand, but we're next to Australia, about 2.5 hours flight. There's two islands, the North Island and the South Island. The South Island's mountainous, very beautiful, and a couple of years ago, Christchurch, our second largest city, had an earthquake, and it killed quite a few people, and knocked out 80% of our CBD. So you can imagine London sort of pretty much annihilated. And so what Christchurch are doing, they've created a central government agency called the Canterbury Earthquake Recovery Authority. And what I've been doing with them is helping them to essentially attract major events into Christchurch. And what they're doing at Christchurch is they're using sporting events as a way to master plan their rebuild of their city. And they're using sporting events in a sense as a way to change Christchurch as a gateway into the South Island and turning it into a destination. It is a beautiful city. It's very English-like, and so sporting events are a very powerful tool there. They're really utilising those, Matt, in their overarching strategy to drive visitations, to engage with the local community, to use it to build new sporting and cultural infrastructure as well. But yeah, again, I reinforce that sporting events are very, very powerful mechanism to actually drive change in a city, as we're hearing, and also to drive domestic and international tourism.
And in the case of Christchurch, what type of sports events are we looking at?
If a city like that has got to look at what do they stand for, and they are kind of going through that process at the moment, Matt. But one example of an event they're looking at is a Masters event. So the Masters movement is people who are generally above 30, 35, and the world's got an ageing population. So they're looking at there's got an opportunity to host an event which has 4 or 5 different sporting disciplines, and hosting that over a month, and that will attract probably about 15,000 Masters age competitors who are generally well-heeled. They travel the world a lot at the peak of their careers and things like that. So they're, Master sports, again, a little bit like Ian, it's participatory sports, so those sports where you can, you can ride with your elite athletes, but also, experience the same course as them. So cycling is another one they're looking at as well. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sally, Paul talked about taking the case study of the World Masters Games, a demographic coming into the city which is from an older demographic, maybe more wealthy than the participants or fans that might come to an under-17s World Cup event. When it comes to Dubai and its strategy of hosting sports events, what type of people are you looking to attract?
From Dubai's perspective, we're looking at a couple of things. So there certainly is looking at, as Paul said, the participatory side of things as well. I mean, that's extremely important. And I think with any event, regardless of whether it is sport or a concert or festival, if you don't have local advocacy and support of the event's not necessarily going to work in that city as well. So that's very much part of our strategy, that we do have advocacy and work closely with the local community. Even as we establish a new event, it's ensuring that the local community is engaged as well. In regards to sort of the demographic of who we're looking at, I think Dubai very much as in building its tourism strategy, and we're working very hard to, as part of being on the global stage, we have many great attributes as a city as well. We're a hub where we have a third of the world within a 4-hour flight of the city, and 2/3 of the world within an 8-hour flight of the city. We are the second busiest airport, following on from Heathrow, and that's changing rapidly as well. So we're looking at whilst we sort of sit within the Middle East, and what might attract, and they certainly at the moment are our largest source market from a tourism perspective. We're also looking at what other markets either are visiting the city or travelling through. So we're not necessarily focusing so much on a particular demographic in relation, say, to age or whatever the case may be. It's more about as a crossroads, and very much within the city, there's over 200 nationalities based in Dubai. So we have a large Indian and Pakistani population. So cricket is very important in the city, because the participation from people living here, and obviously also broadcasting, and in fact the ICC is based in Dubai. So we've recently announced a Dubai tour, which again is a cycling event. So I mean, obviously listening amongst us all, cycling is a growing event globally. And again, part of what we do, and I think a really important part of sporting events as well, is what do they actually say about the city as well. So strategically, sometimes it's about, from a tourism perspective, you're actually able to put the city on a map out to a large broadcast through TV or press or whatever the case may be. So we look at all those different factors in looking at the events we're looking for.
Donna, with a major event like the European Games, I think particularly when it's in its planning stages at the moment, I think people may often forget that a lot of the business that will attract, a lot of people will come to Baku for the first time on a business trip to negotiate a contract, to carry out a contract. Is that the case? And how can a city go about turning that business traveller into a more of a recreational traveller in the long term?
That's certainly the case at the moment for Baku, because this is really fast track. We're hosting these games in 18 months' time. And in fact, Baku was only awarded the games this time last year, so they had ultimately 2.5 years to deliver what is similar size as a Winter Games or the Commonwealth Games. So consequently, there's a lot of interest from overseas companies who were suppliers to London 2012, who've been suppliers to the Commonwealth Games. Baku doesn't, or Azerbaijan doesn't necessarily have the pool of resources within the city, so we have to look outside for that. So every single day I have a supplier contact us, and there's tender processes. So in fact, you may be looking for one company to supply seats in the stadium, but 20 companies will tender. I think the opportunity is always there to turn visitors in any corporate travel into tourists. And actually, the city is so nice, and like all of the destinations that we're representing today, the city is really lovely. It's quite a party city, so people, come for a few days, and they end up staying for the weekend, and then the next thing we find out, someone wants to come with their family for a long weekend. So it's really starting to grow. So I think the 10% year on year that they saw from the Eurovision will be much more than that over the next 2 years by the time they've hosted the European Games.
Mm-hmm. And what about for London, Ian? Who are the most valuable travellers that come to London, and do they come for sport?
No, well, in terms of per head spend, no. Business. This event we're all attending today is one of the, a big driver of spend in the city. And we might be sports fans, but we're business people, and we're here to do a job. And the spend that we can bring to spending an event like this is much bigger than your average fan that might come out and watch a tennis game or a cycling event that we talked about. So, no, business tourism is per head much more a much more lucrative addition to the economy of a city. But it's that wider appeal that the media that associated with the sport event brings that that creates the opportunity to bring further visits and further spend later on, sort of thing. So it is that exposure, that passion, and we know from analysis we've done, approximately a third of all tourists would attend for a major event. Again, how you define that, so it's a motivator for leisure decisions. You kind of have a balanced approach. You don't say, well, we just want the people who've got the most money and stage the events with the people who've got the most money. Probably all of us are talking about having targeted objectives for targeted events. And in the UK, in London, the US, and near Europe, and France, Italy, Germany, Spain are the biggest spenders. And so events that appeal to those markets are valuable to us. But we know the world is changing, and we know China, for example. We hosted the Badminton World Championships 2 years ago, and know just how big badminton is in China. And China, nobody can afford to take their eye off the ball in terms of the Chinese market in the next 5 or 10 years, sort of thing. So we all need a strategy that addresses that.
Paul, is that something you'd agree with when you're speaking to cities?
Oh, totally. You have to, a city or, whether it's a country or a city as a destination, they have to be really clear why they're in the game of events. What are they trying to achieve? Is it to build new infrastructure, be the catalyst? Is it to drive visitation? Are there social reasons? Or is it the myriad? Is it all those things? And kind of what Ian's saying, you need to have a portfolio of events. My sector is by far, that has the greatest return. But kind of, this is work, Sports is kind of a bit of work and recreation. So you want a mixture, and obviously cultural and arts events. So cities tend to have a major event strategy, and it's generally aligned with a tourism strategy. As Sally said here for Dubai, it's a pillar of their tourism strategy. A destination has to be very clear in what they're in this game for, and there's a formal kind of process you have to actually secure events.
And Sally, that leads me nicely on to what I was going to say to you. So how does Dubai approach sports events to other more exhibitions, concerts, all the other stuff that is an entertainment option but not with a sporting angle?
I think we're all saying today that they will drive different audiences and visitation as well. I think when you look at from a tourism perspective, your calendar of events does need to will attract different people. I think from a sporting event perspective, you probably have 3 types of visitors who will come along. You've got your fanatics, so it doesn't matter where that event's held, they're always going to attend it. You have people where the fact that event is on may help influence their decision to come to the city, and then you have people who are already there, and it's a nice thing to do when they're actually already there. So that's regardless of whether that's for sport or any other event. And so when we're looking at our annual calendar of events, we're looking to look at where are there gaps in the calendar. We like to have a mix of genres, so whether it be sport, business events, art and culture, and many of those things we're developing as we go as well. And we also looking at the gaps of where are there times within the calendar throughout the year. And every city has low seasons, and so it's what can you do, and using events in some of those low seasons to actually perhaps drive visitation during that time. When I was living in Sydney, that low season was June, which was the winter, and so it was what can you do differently in Dubai? It's August, which is the hottest time of the year, in summer. And so when we look at that, we have to be strategic about what do we do. And sporting events still will fit within that. And we've, over the last couple of years, they've developed a indoor sporting events. And so the whole way through that year, we're looking at a calendar that will add that diversity, that creates different drivers and reasons for people to visit the city.
Mm-hmm. And if we take our panellists, some of the cities or regions that they represent, Baku, London, Dubai, Auckland for Paul in the past, for major rights holders who own sports events, you guys would be almost the prettiest girls at the ball. They've got a series of events at every single level that they're looking to place in cities. Paul, if I can start with you, what advice would you give to a city maybe new to the game looking to host sports events when it comes to dealing with the likes of anyone from FIFA?
Well, I think they should talk to Winning Major Events Limited. That's a joke, thank you. Yeah, they need to be, comes back to that thing, they need to be really clear in what they're about. You need to be understanding what are you in the game for? Is it, as I said before, is it to drive visitations? Is it to, to raise your international profile, things like that? And a lot of cities do that. For Auckland, it was what we did, and 10 years ago, we weren't on the landscape at all. But what we did is we took I'd probably call a shotgun approach, where we basically just wanted to get out there and start securing major events, start to understand the process, because there really is a process that you need to follow. You don't want to get the wrong events that flop. So you have to essentially go through create an event strategy, be very clear in what your strategic objectives are. You then basically identify opportunities. You undertake feasibility studies, which is looking at the opportunities, the risks associated with these things, the benefits, the economic, social, cultural benefits and things like that. And then you would generally go through a bidding process with the international sports federations. And that process, the bidding process, can be from a couple of months to years if you're talking about Ian and the Olympics and stuff like that whole lobbying and stuff like that. So there is a formal process that you go through, and some of the sports federations have much more formal processes, and others are a little bit more ad hoc and loose. But once we just to wrap up, once we took that shotgun approach, we've now narrowed it down through our strategy and really very, very targeted. Auckland is known as a city of sails, so our focus is really on sailing events, America's Cup, Volvo, Clipper, things like that. Yeah.
And Sally, with your Sydney and your Dubai hats on, what have you learned in your time in the sector when it comes to talking to sports rights holders, federations about hosting major events?
Probably from the city perspective, naturally those right holders are always trying to get the best deal, and so therefore it's really important to do that due diligence and really look at what's on offer as well, because in the end they're looking for the best deal for themselves. I totally agree with Paul, you need to really understand your strategy. There's no point in just getting an event for the sake of saying you've won an event, because that doesn't necessarily, that can backfire on you in the end. You've got to be very clear and stick to that strategy as well, and be prepared to negotiate hard, because often if an event comes to you, they actually want to be in your city, so you don't have to necessarily, you often have the upper hand.
And do you have anything to add therein? Obviously London can pretty much host any event it wants, maybe not the Winter Olympics, but...
Well, we are building an indoor ski facility just adjacent to the Olympic Park. So last time I saw Mayor Boris Johnson, he did say, "Oh, we can get some skiing event, can't we?" So you never know. You might find some winter event in an indoor venue. But no, I mean, as I said before, we were in the business of bidding for the Olympic Games. We, as a city, didn't coordinate ourselves. There wasn't actually a mayor. The idea of a mayor of London is only a relatively new thing. 13 years ago, when we first had a mayor, New York sort of put in place their mayor, and that sort of changed their strategy about how they organised themselves. So London never did that. That didn't mean there wasn't great international sport and international events in the city, but they were done through private arrangements with venues and creation of rights or negotiation of rights. So we could have gone on as a city like that and not entered into this competitive environment and bidding. But like I said, we found it of value. So there are things that politically we can make the case to say this is worth investing in more than we would otherwise have done, and that's at the end of the day the important thing to do. All of these events cost money. It costs money to stage an event like this, and the returns are there, but who are they there for, and what type of returns are they? Some of them are political, so there's some cash invested for a political return. That might not suit everybody. That actually, I want to see a cash return for my cash investment. So, therefore that may mean you can't afford to bid for some events and can for others. But, there are things like people coming to London, like the NFL, the American Football League, 32 teams, all based in the US, have their league, incredibly successful, incredibly well delivered in the US. They want to internationalise their games. They want to stage a game outside the US, and they see London as a gateway to doing that. Our assets of a great venue, a great audience, a travelling public, people that are fans and would buy tickets, is enough for them. So they do a private deal with the venue, and it's good for the team owners that perhaps would otherwise have played their game in Tampa Bay or in Jacksonville and had 40,000 people there. They can come and play their game in Wembley and have 84,000 people there. And it makes commercial sense to them. There's a lot of risk and a lot of cost associated with that, but they're willing to put their own dollar forward to make that happen without it requiring a lot of money from the city to do. But that's what London could do from a position of strength over years, where we are this critical mass of media and fans and capability that not every city is, and it's not realistic to assume the NFL is going to suddenly start playing its games in Auckland, unfortunately. So.
Mm-hmm. And Donna, obviously with your work both on London and in Baku, what have you found in the past decade or so when you're working with the rights owners, with the sports bodies that own the events?
I think I think the difference between the European Games in Baku and obviously the London Olympics. The London Olympics is a brand in its own right now. The Olympics is such a strong brand. It's the most recognised symbol around the world, I think, alongside Coca-Cola, I believe. And the European Games was very different. There has been in existence for a long time the Pan-American Games, the Asian Games and the African Games, but the European Olympic NOCs, 49 NOCs, had a dream for many years, about 8 years, to host games in Europe. And we're building a brand. So actually, with the Olympics, it was very easy to talk to an international federation or a hotel or a rights holder, and the door would open and straight away. This is very different. You have to explain what this is, but it is a derivative, if you like, of the Olympic Games. It's the European Olympic Committee are the hosts. They've awarded the rights to Baku. And so it's building up the interest with the rights holders, and I've seen that firsthand, because finding a host broadcaster, finding rights holders isn't like it was in London, where Channel 4 outbid BBC to host the Olympics. Actually, the driver here isn't about money for Azerbaijan, getting money from the rights holders. It's about the exposure that they'll get to 49 European countries, really highlighting and selling their country. But it definitely, it is different, but actually once you start to talk to the European federations and to the National Olympic Committees, this is a major multi-sport event. It's held over 17 days. It's 18 confirmed sports. It's in 19 venues. The enthusiasm and the excitement starts to build.
Great. We've got about 15 minutes left. I'd like to open the discussion to the floor, if we can, a perfect opportunity to ask some questions to our expert panel. Well, one at the front here. Could you please introduce yourself before you ask your question?
Rachel Church from Major Events International. A question for Paul. You haven't mentioned Rugby World Cup in 2011. How has that transformed Auckland and led to more international visitors?
I think the Rugby World Cup has been incredible for New Zealand and for Auckland, because what it is, it's built our credibility as a nation to be able to host major events. So that makes it easier for us to secure further events. What it's done is also, if you've ever organised your own wedding or whatever, when you have a deadline, you're forced to get focused. And what that did for the country, it forced government at the central and local government level, it forced the national tourism organisation, Tourism New Zealand, and our regional tourism organisations to actually come together. All these government agencies to force them together to actually provide much better systems. And it's kind of what Ian's alluding to with the Olympics. You get improvements in transportation, which is better for the visitors. You get new infrastructure built, airports upgraded, sporting facilities upgraded. So it really is just setting a framework for better sports events tourism, really, Rachel.
You have a really interesting integrated ticketing system as well. I'm sure the audience would like to hear more about that.
Yeah, Auckland has been a very fragmented city with a lot of transport providers, and the Rugby World Cup in Auckland, what that did is it forced the providers to actually have an integrated system. So when you, and it may be common now, but when you purchase your ticket to the Rugby World Cup, you got transport right from, either it's on bus, ferry, or train, free transportation right to the venue. But I suppose one of the things that came out of that was the fan trail that we had from central Auckland to Eden Park, which was our main venue, which is about 3 kilometres, and what the team there created was a fan trail, so people would meet down at the kind of the social area, the party central as we called it, and then would walk the 3 kilometres to Eden Park, and there was entertainment all the way along and all that. Again, that's just engaging with our international visitors, creating a sense of atmosphere and celebration. So yeah, major event like Rugby World Cup is, again, it's just a really good sales tool, because you're communicating with people when they're emotionally engaged in their passion.
If we look at something like the Rugby World Cup, which I believe attracted 130,000 visitors in that region?
140-ish, yeah.
Okay. Obviously that sounds an impressive number, but how has everyone found assessing the ROI of hosting a major sports event? Is there a standardised way of doing it?
No, that's the problem, and I think everybody here would have different systems, and there's no, and that's what New Zealand is trying to do. Central government's trying to have a standardised region return on investment, and so it is a bit piecemeal across. Well, it is very piecemeal across the world, and each city will have a different way of measuring its return on investment. But the return on investment is not just economic. There is social investment, returns. Yeah, but that is a part of the process when you're actually going out to secure an event, whether you're growing it yourself or bidding it. Each one of these organisations here would do their own feasibility analysis, risk assessments, economic and impact assessments.
And Ian, somewhere like London, how do you approach that? Obviously, so many events.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just spent most of the day yesterday on analysing statistics around road closure events. In the streets of London, we're the UK's capital city as well as a city in our own right. So we might have the Queen deciding a certain road was closed to have a procession down for the state opening of Parliament, or we might have a celebration that the royal family or Margaret Thatcher's funeral involves a big procession that closes roads and impacts on people's daily lives, whether they're delivery driver or the taxi driver or anything else. So, there are sacrifices with staging major events, and I'm currently analysing how we can compare a 10-kilometre run to St Patrick's Day parade, to a New Year's Eve fireworks, to a gay pride procession, to Ride London as a big cycling event, and actually say, okay, how many people are in hotels because of that? How many people are day visitors? How much did they spend? What's the social value against some of these things? And actually, okay, can we afford to do it? Is it worth doing it? We're no longer the Olympic city. Do we need to be doing all this? And actually, it's a difficult thing to do. We do have hard facts, a model which we follow, which says number of people how much more money do they spend because they attended the event they wouldn't have spent anyway. So we work up numbers, we calculate and show per event exactly what that consists of. But at the end of the day, quite often it's these other intangibles that can be the difference between, choosing to make an investment and stage something, which is the harder to quantify one, and that might be a sort of a critical mass of political forces because a mayor has been in place and wants to make a big statement, or because there's a lot of public will behind the idea of a sports event, for example. So, sometimes we do our job, we all will produce our numbers, but at the end of the day, whether something happens or not can often be a political
Matt, I
decision.
think one thing to add to that is cities or destinations got to be very careful about when they're looking at numbers of an event. We looked at hosting the Commonwealth Games, and it's a relatively big event, a lot of competitors and stuff like that. And we knew that Melbourne had recently hosted the Commonwealth Games. And I won't go into the figures here, but they were quoting X thousands of people with visitations that came through to that event. And when we actually did our feasibility on that, our economists essentially went to the Melbourne airport and actually looked at visitations from flights coming in, and there really wasn't any increase in numbers. So a lot of those visitations were actually just domestic. It might be, so you've got to be careful, what events you're looking at and overlay them on your particular destination. Commonwealth Games here in Glasgow might be totally different because it's a lot easier for people from Europe and things like that to get to Glasgow. But to get to Australia and New Zealand, your formulas and your way of looking at this can be quite a little bit different.
Yeah.
I think you also have to take into account as well the amount of business that's displaced because of a major event that's coming to a city. Not everybody wanted to be part of the Olympics. There were a lot of people that wanted to get out of the city, and so they took their holiday at that time. The same will happen in Baku. Actually, their economy is largely based around oil and gas, and there will, without doubt, be a displacement of that during that period. The benefits, of course, are much greater, so the long-term benefits outweigh the short-term displacement, but it is something that you need to consider.
Yeah, good point.
Another question in the back?
Sally, actually. Do you see any benefits coming your way from the hosting of the World Cup in Qatar? So you're not obviously hosting something, but you can obviously hugely benefit as being like a hub in that region?
Absolutely, and the government is in talk with Qatar government about some of the things we actually can work on in partnership as far as that's concerned. So, very much so. Qatar has its own airway, but the city is not large enough to be able to host everybody who would perhaps come to the World Cup. So therefore, there's great advantage for us and other cities in the region, but particularly for Dubai. The people, it's an hour flight from Dubai to Doha. So without a doubt, there's certainly potential for us to capitalise on the event.
Hi, it's Samantha Mailing from Electronic Travel Industry Digest. I just wanted to have a bit more of a discussion about Rio, as Rio was mentioned in the introduction, but obviously it's got 2 mega events coming up next year in 2016. I just wanted to see what your thoughts were on how Rio can make the most of this double whammy of mega events in 2 years.
It's got to be one for Ian.
Well, again, people host events for different reasons, so you kind of got to get under the skin about maybe what they want to achieve. But clearly there'll be an infrastructure impact that any major event is a catalyst for change, and there's a huge team put in place. In our case, Locog and the team that Donna worked for was there to deliver the games for that one event. Now, then, obviously the city wants to get benefits from the infrastructure improvements way beyond that one event for many, many years to come. Actually having 2 next to each other means you've actually got to very specifically design in sort of some challenges that you're going to be facing again soon, straight away. So will bring a lot of focus to the mind of the people putting infrastructure improvements in place to say, well, actually, it's not just theoretically we might be using this again, it's actually practically, and there's a team in place to actually need to do it, and this has got to work again, and whether it's airport or transport or venues, etc. So that will be one. I think another, there are different audiences, there's different marketplaces that the two events attract. The Football World Cup is a different beast to Olympic and Paralympic Games, and brings different media with it as well. So, I think it will be a huge challenge, but probably can't be anything but good in terms of
if they get it right.
Exactly. If they get it right. I mean, but that said, I mean, everybody. There are good experiences and bad experiences of hosting major events, and thankfully our clients at the IOC will probably regard London as a very successfully delivered event, and might be less gracious about some of their experiences about previous host cities, and certainly not Sydney. No, I mean,
but if you think Delhi of the Commonwealth Games,
well, and Delhi and Commonwealth Games, there was certainly some a lot of issues around that. So, but that said, they will always be delivered. There will be benefits. There are benefits in Athens. There's an improved train system in Athens. What Greece and Athens have suffered from is a sort of a mega issue over and above what hosting the Olympic Games is. So going back to Rio and Brazil, if they do it well, then they will get benefits. They will get benefits if they don't do it well. They'll still do a job, and it will still be successfully delivered in a form. I have absolutely no doubt. It's just how much benefit and whether successfully cities get those benefits.
I also think for the World Cup, the whole country will see the benefits of the World Cup, because the games will be played in probably 11 cities around the country, whereas the Olympics, whilst there are events going on outside of Rio, is predominantly focused on Rio. So in fact they do get a different benefit from both events.
I think we've got time for one last quick question.
John Grabowski from IMG. I was just wondering if you could provide some insight into the decision-making processes on, from a city and a tourism side. Obviously, tourism strategies are often internal documents, and the rest of us don't get to see those. But the World Cup and Olympics very much speak for themselves. There's a very established bidding process. But smaller events, tennis events, running, cycling, golf. How do you go about assessing amount of people coming, revenue opportunities from each of those people versus media exposure that's going to be provided, and then, as you mentioned, things like political agendas? How structured is that process, and what insight can you provide into how those decisions are made?
I'd say it's totally focused on the city. Each city will have different systems, different levels of advancement. I mean, in Auckland, we knew the value of a delegate from my sector as opposed to somebody from the sports sector. We followed a formal, as I said, a feasibility process which looked at, that did economic impact assessments on that particular event. You worked out the numbers. It's to a certain extent, it's crystal ball gazing about how many people will come. But you look at previous events and things like that. Then you also identify what some of the key risks are. They might be political risks as well as infrastructural build risks and things like that. I don't know if you want to add anything else, Ian. But there is we had a formal process that we would follow. Some cities who are not advanced at this will, it'll be kind of slightly ad hocish probably.
I think, each city definitely will have its own process. What we did in Sydney to what we do in Dubai is slightly different, but I think the principles are very much the same in that you, again, coming back to what's right for the city. So for you, looking at what we'll really be looking at is understanding what is important to the city. So as much as where they're saying what's going to work for us as a city, it's important for the events to actually look at what is that city looking for and how is it trying to position itself. And I mean, I don't think with a little bit of research, you can always find that out about a city. What are they doing? Where are they going? So yes, some of the actual intricacies of how that's actually managed is not public document, but how the city wants to position itself, what does the city want to say about itself, is public, and therefore that's where, as an event, you should be looking at those sorts of things to look at matching that.
I think also cities don't generally just bid for one event in isolation. There is a long-term strategy, and so consequently a series of events are bid for. So Azerbaijan, to go back to them, Baku is hosting the World Chess Championships. I think that's next year. They have an athletics champs next year, World Gymnastics Championships. So this is all a build-up, and they're almost, we're looking at them almost like readiness events, test events for the European Games. But then beyond that, they have a citywide strategy post-2015. So it's never just in isolation.
I think we would. I'd just add that from a London perspective, actually, we're very sophisticated now. I can talk at a level of knowledge about the number of travellers. I can scrutinise some event organisers' pack of information to say it has a cumulative audience of 4.5 billion people, and they have economic benefit of $230 million, and I can look under the skin of that, and I can tell you exactly what the benefits are from that event to London, and it's significantly lower than the numbers that will be in this presentation pack. But so we are very sophisticated now. We kind of can compare. But actually, when I was first in post 5.5 years ago, we were probably very unsophisticated, and actually apart from the fact that we at that point had become the hosts for the next Olympic Games, we'd realised actually maybe there's something in it, this bidding business. There wasn't a lot of science behind it at that point, and there's more about political imperative to say, oh my God, we're about to stage 26 major championships in one go at the Olympic Games. We need to get up our game in terms of some of the major events, that we've never hosted before, sort of thing. So, in the early days, it was very, okay, well, we've got to put something in the park, for example, something very crude like that. But we've evolved to be much more sophisticated, more analysed, and we're paid employees in our respective fields, and we'll tell you it's all, very scientifically done, and we can prove that our worth. But probably in times before we were employed, that didn't exist, and it needs people to do the analysis.
Thanks, Ian. We've run out of time, I'm afraid. Thank you for your time. Big thanks to Mark and to Eurosport for the support on the panel. Big thanks to panelists, to Donna, Ian, Sally, and Paul. Thanks a lot.
Well done, mate.